That's it. That's what we do. Yeah. Been on back for the next song. Never done back, then I never stay running. Been on back, damn, no one got stacks to the left. I'm taking bitches straight for another can.
The story begins not with battles or kingdoms, but with the quiet rhythm of an ordinary boy's life. His name was Daniel, a 16-year-old high school student living in a bustling modern city. His world was defined by school bells, homework deadlines, and the occasional escape into video games late at night. Like many teenagers, he often dreamed of something more, something greater than the repetitive cycle of classes and exams. Yet, his reality was simple, even painfully normal. Every morning Daniel would drag himself out of bed to the sound of his alarm clock, hitting the snooze button far too many times. His room was a mess of scattered textbooks, snack wrappers, and half-finished notebooks. On the wall hung a single poster of a fantasy video game, the kind where a humble hero could wield swords, defeat monsters, and rise to become a savior of kingdoms. That poster was indeed just decoration. It was Daniel's window into a life he wished he had. School was no different from his room, chaotic, loud, and uninspiring. Daniel sat at the back of the classroom, rarely raising his hand. Teachers knew him as the boy who had potential but never quite cared enough to show it. His classmates thought of him as quiet, almost invisible, though a few friends knew him as the kid who could stay up all night explaining strategy guides for games they barely understood. Despite the mundanity of his days, Daniel carried a restless spirit. There was always this gnawing thought at the back of his mind. Is this it? Is this all life is meant to be? He longed for something extraordinary, for a chance to prove that he could be more than just a background character in the story of his own life. The truth was, Daniel often felt out of place in his own world. While others seemed content to talk about grades, future colleges, or weekend hangouts, he found himself lost in thoughts of distant castles, fierce battles, and forgotten prophecies. He read fantasy novels in secret, imagining himself walking through enchanted forests or standing at the edge of grand battlefields. These were not just stories for him, they were a lifeline, a reminder that somewhere, somehow, adventure might be waiting, but reality had its way of crushing dreams. His father worked long hours, barely home for dinner. His mother, though kind, was often too busy managing the household to notice his distant stares. Even his closest friends sometimes teased him for being too dreamy. At night, when the city outside glowed with neon lights and the noise of traffic, Daniel would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if fate had forgotten him. And yet, life always has a way of changing when one least expects it. The shift began on an evening like any other. Daniel was sitting at his desk, attempting to finish a history assignment. His room was dimly lit, his computer humming in the background. Outside, rain tapped against the window, a steady rhythm that filled the silence. He rubbed his tired eyes and glanced at the game poster on his wall. For a moment he imagined himself stepping through it, leaving behind the endless essays, the buzzing city, the weight of being ordinary. His thoughts were interrupted by a strange sensation, a sudden dizziness that made his vision blur. The letters on his paper seemed to twist and rearrange, the light in his room flickering unnaturally. Daniel blinked hard, thinking it was exhaustion, but the dizziness only grew stronger. His chest tightened, his heartbeat thundering as though something unseen was calling to him. He tried to stand, but his legs buckled beneath him. The room tilted, spinning like a whirlpool, and Daniel felt himself falling not onto the floor, but into an abyss of light and shadow. It was as though the ground itself had vanished, leaving him suspended in a vast emptiness. In that moment, fragments of sound echoed in his ears. The clash of swords, the roar of distant beasts, the cries of soldiers calling out in a language he did not recognize. He glimpsed flashes of imagery: towering castles under siege, a blood-red sky, and a throne bathed in golden light. A voice, deep and commanding, whispered words that sent chills through his very soul. "Awaken, heir of the crown." Daniel gasped, struggling to understand what was happening. Was he dreaming? Was his mind breaking under the weight of his own fantasies? The light grew brighter, overwhelming, until it consumed everything: his room, his city, his very sense of self. He reached out, desperate to hold on to something familiar, but there was nothing, only the blinding brilliance and the echo of that voice pulling him deeper. And then, silence. Daniel's eyes opened again, but the world he saw was not his own. Gone were the neon lights of the city, the messy desk, the poster on his wall. Instead, above him stretched a ceiling of carved stone, adorned with golden patterns that shimmered faintly in the torchlight. The air smelled of incense and polished wood, heavy and regal. Beneath him was not the rough carpet of his room, but silk sheets smoother than anything he had ever touched. His body felt strange, heavier yet stronger. When he lifted his hands, they were not his own, slender but noble, adorned with rings that glinted in the light. His reflection in a nearby mirror revealed not the tired face of a teenager, but the features of someone else entirely: a young man with sharp eyes, royal garments, and an aura of authority. The voice from before returned, no longer distant but echoing within his chest. "The prince has awakened." Daniel staggered, gripping the bedpost, his mind a storm of confusion. He wanted to scream, to deny what his senses told him, but the truth was undeniable. He was no longer in his world, no longer himself. He had awakened in the body of a prince, in a kingdom that seemed pulled straight from the fantasies he had always longed for. The ordinary life he had known was gone. In its place stood a destiny far greater than anything he could have imagined. And so, the story truly began. The next morning came with an almost unbearable clarity. Sunlight streamed through the massive windows of the royal chamber, spilling golden warmth across the room's velvet curtains and polished marble floor. The boy, still adjusting to the reality that he was no longer himself but rather a prince of this unknown kingdom, opened his eyes slowly. The first thing he noticed was how heavy his head felt, not from sleep, but from the golden circlet resting upon it. It was not a full crown, but a band of precious metal inlaid with tiny gems, a symbol of status that told the world he was not just anyone. He touched it with uncertain fingers, marveling at its weight. Yesterday, he had been an ordinary high school student worried about exams and deadlines. Today, the crown marked him as heir to a throne he did not yet understand. The palace servants moved quietly about the room. None seemed suspicious of his confusion, but every gesture reminded him of the expectations placed upon him. They bowed, dressed him in robes embroidered with golden thread, and addressed him with phrases like "Your Highness" and "My Prince." Each word was like a stone dropped into his chest, reminding him of the role he was expected to play. At breakfast, he found himself seated at a long table where nobles gathered. Their sharp eyes studied him with both respect and calculation. Platters of roasted meats, fruits glistening with dew, and loaves of bread spread across the table, but he barely tasted anything. His mind churned with questions. Where was this kingdom? Why was he here? Could he ever go home? One of the older lords leaned forward, his voice smooth but firm. "Your Highness," he said, "the council awaits your decision on the border dispute with the northern tribes." The student inside him froze. A border dispute, a council awaiting his word. Back in his real life, the most important decision he made was whether to finish his homework or watch an anime episode before bed. Now, men twice his age looked to him for leadership in matters of war and peace. He fumbled for an answer, forcing himself to nod with as much confidence as he could fake. "I will consider it carefully," he said, his voice steady though his heart raced. The lords exchanged glances, some doubtful, others quietly approving. He could only hope his vague response bought him time. Later that day, he wandered through the palace gardens to clear his head. The air smelled of roses and damp earth, and the sound of fountains offered a moment of calm. But peace didn't last. From behind a hedge, he overheard two maids whispering. "They say the prince has changed since yesterday," one said. "His eyes are different, his manner, almost like another soul lives within him." The boy's stomach dropped. Was his secret already exposed? He clenched his fists, forcing himself to walk away before they noticed his presence. As night fell, he was summoned again, this time to the throne room where his father, the king, awaited. The monarch sat tall and imposing, his robes flowing like rivers of silk. His eyes, sharp as an eagle's, scanned his son. "You carry yourself differently, my son," the king said. "Yesterday you were rash and impatient, yet today you pause before speaking. You weigh your words. Perhaps you are finally growing into the crown that awaits you." The boy bowed his head, unsure whether to feel relieved or frightened. His disguise, it seemed, was convincing enough for now. But when he returned to his chambers, he could no longer hold back the flood of thoughts crashing within him. What if this was not a dream? What if he was truly trapped in this world, bound to live as the prince until the end of his days? Could he shoulder the weight of decisions that affected thousands of lives? As he lay on the silk bed, the golden circlet resting nearby, he whispered to himself, "If this crown is mine now, I have to learn how to carry it. I can't let them see my fear. I have to become what they believe I already am." Yet, even as he spoke those words, a darker question lingered in the corners of his mind. If I ruled this kingdom, who am I really ruling for them, or myself? And so, with the weight of a crown pressing upon his very soul, the boy prepared to face the uncertain days ahead, never knowing whether his next choice would save the kingdom, or doom it. The days that followed were a blur of lessons, counsels, and endless watchful eyes. The boy, still very much a student on the inside, struggled to adapt to his new identity as a prince. Every hour of his life now seemed choreographed. There were tutors who lectured him on history, strategy, and diplomacy. There were servants who anticipated his every need, bowing so low he felt guilty. There were guards who followed him like shadows, reminding him constantly that he was not free. At first he tried to play along, hoping this strange existence was temporary. Perhaps he would wake up in his real world again, in his small bedroom with textbooks scattered across the desk. But as the days turned into weeks, he realized the truth. This world was not letting him go. And so, he decided to survive. One morning, while walking through a corridor lined with statues of long-dead kings, he overheard two officials arguing in hushed tones. "The treasury is nearly empty," one whispered. "Then raise the taxes again," the other snapped. "The people are weak, but they will endure." The boy's heart sank. He remembered the weary faces of servants in the kitchens, the calloused hands of stable boys who bowed when he passed. Raising taxes would crush them, yet the nobles treated it like a simple inconvenience. That night, curiosity pulled him deeper into the palace than he had ever gone before. Guided only by the flicker of a lantern, he discovered a forgotten stairwell behind a tapestry. It led down into the lower levels of the castle, where the air grew colder and the stone walls were damp. There he stumbled upon a locked iron gate. Through the bars, he saw something shocking. A group of prisoners, thin and ragged, huddled in chains. Their eyes burned with resentment as they noticed him. One of them, a woman with dirt-streaked cheeks but a strong, unwavering gaze, stepped forward. "So, the prince comes to see the people he has forgotten," she said bitterly. The boy gripped the bars, guilt tightening in his chest. I didn't know," he stammered. "Why are you here?" "Because we refused to pay the king's impossible taxes," the woman spat. "Because we asked for bread instead of starving, and now we rot in darkness while you feast above." Her words cut him deeper than any blade could. He realized that being a prince was not about crowns and jewels, it was about choices. Choices that shaped lives, for better or worse. Before he could respond, footsteps echoed in the stairwell. A guard appeared, his torchlight casting sharp shadows. The boy quickly stepped back, trying to mask his shock. "Your Highness," the guard said with surprise. "These dungeons are not fit for you. Please return upstairs." The boy forced a calm nod, hiding the turmoil within. But as he left, the woman's voice followed him, low and defiant. "Remember us, Prince. If you are truly different from your father, prove it." That night, he could not sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw their faces. The next morning, he found himself summoned to another council meeting. This time, the topic was war. The northern tribes had raided a border village, and the lords demanded retaliation. Their voices thundered across the hall. "Burn their lands. Crush them before they grow bold. Show no mercy." The boy listened silently, his heart pounding. He remembered the prisoners in the dungeons, punished for something as simple as hunger. Now these lords called for blood, for villages to be destroyed, villages filled with people no different from the ones chained below. Finally, all eyes turned to him. "Your Highness," the king said, his voice heavy with authority. "What is your counsel?" The boy swallowed hard. This was his first true test. Speak rashly, and he could ignite a war. Stay silent, and he would lose all respect. He thought of the woman in the dungeon, her burning eyes daring him to be different. Taking a deep breath, he spoke. "We cannot rush into bloodshed," he said firmly. "A war will cost us dearly. Instead, let us first send envoys, find out why the tribes raid. Perhaps hunger drives them, just as hunger drives our own people. If we talk, perhaps we can prevent more suffering." A stunned silence filled the chamber. The lords exchanged shocked looks. Some muttered angrily under their breath, but the king leaned forward, studying his son with sharp interest. "Wise words," the king said at last. "Unexpected, but wise." The boy exhaled slowly, relief washing over him. For now, he had bought time. Later that evening, while walking in the gardens, a figure stepped out from the shadows. It was the woman from the dungeons. Somehow, she had escaped or been released. She bowed slightly, though her eyes still held steel. "You spoke for peace today," she said softly. "Perhaps you truly are not your father's son." The boy froze, questions flooding his mind. Who was she really? A prisoner, a spy, or something more? Before he could ask, she vanished back into the night, leaving him with only one certainty. The palace walls hid secrets far greater than he had imagined. And for the first time, he realized that his life as a prince was not just survival. It was a story already tangled in intrigue, betrayal, and the dangerous hope of change. The palace, for all its beauty, was a cage woven from whispers. Every corridor carried secrets, and every glance seemed to conceal intent. The boy was beginning to understand that life as a prince was not only about lessons and appearances. It was about survival in a game he barely understood. After his counsel for peace, the halls buzzed with divided opinions. Some nobles called him weak, unfit to lead. Others praised his wisdom, whispering that perhaps a new kind of ruler had come. But within those shifting tides of loyalty lurked danger, for nothing stirred hatred faster than change. The boy's days grew heavier. Tutors pressed him harder on strategy, demanding he memorize the histories of wars past. Servants bowed deeper, yet he caught them exchanging nervous glances when they thought he wasn't watching. Even the guards at his chamber door seemed more alert, as though waiting for trouble to arrive. One evening, while studying maps in his chamber, he heard a knock. His old mentor, Sir Arik, the man who had first instructed him in etiquette, entered with a grave expression. "Your Highness," Arik said softly, closing the door behind him. "You must be cautious. Your words in the council have stirred unrest." The boy frowned. "Unrest? I only asked for peace. How could that threaten anyone?" "Because peace does not fill coffers," Arik replied bitterly. "War lines the pockets of lords and generals. They see your restraint as weakness. And weakness, in these halls, is blood in the water." The boy shivered. "Then what do I do?" Eric's eyes softened. For a moment the old man looked almost fatherly. "You must learn to distinguish friend from foe. Not everyone who bows wishes you well. The warning proved true sooner than expected. A week later, the boy was summoned to a feast. The great hall shimmered with candlelight, the tables heavy with roasted meats, fruits, and wines. Musicians played cheerful tunes and laughter filled the air. Yet beneath the merriment lingered tension. He could feel eyes on him measuring, judging. At the center of the long table sat the king, his presence commanding even in silence. To his right were generals clad in polished armor, their chests heavy with medals. To his left sat nobles draped in silks, their jewels glittering like predators' eyes. The boy took his place beside his father, every movement careful. The feast began. Cups clinked, meat was carved, and the hall echoed with toasts. But halfway through the night, a noblewoman rose with a sly smile. "Your Highness," she said sweetly, her voice carrying through the hall. "Tell us, what counsel would you give, should the northern tribes refuse peace? Would you still beg for talks, or would you finally wield the sword your crown demands?" The hall fell silent. Every gaze turned toward him. It was a trap. He saw it in the way the generals smirked, waiting for him to falter. His throat tightened. He remembered Eric's words, blood in the water. He forced his voice steady. "I would defend our people," he said carefully, "but I would not send them to die unless there was no other path. A ruler's duty is not glory, it is responsibility." Murmurs rippled through the hall, some nodded, others sneered, but before he could feel relief, the noblewoman raised her goblet in mock cheer. Spoken like a scholar, not a warrior. She laughed, and several lords joined in, their laughter sharp as blades. The boy clenched his fists under the table, shame burning his cheeks. Yet the king only watched, his expression unreadable. That night, after the feast, he returned to his chamber heavy with doubt, but as he opened the door, he froze. The window was ajar, curtains fluttering in the cold wind, and on his desk sat a goblet of wine he had not ordered. Something about it felt wrong. He reached out slowly, and as his fingers brushed the rim, he noticed a faint powdery residue clinging to the edge. His heart pounded, poisoned. Before he could react, a shadow detached itself from the corner of the room. A man dressed in black lunged forward, dagger glinting in the moonlight. The boy stumbled back, fear surging through him. But just as the blade descended, another figure burst into the chamber. Eric. The old mentor moved with startling speed, catching the assassin's wrist and driving his elbow into the man's chest. The dagger clattered to the floor. The boy gasped, frozen in shock, as the two men struggled. Eric overpowered the attacker, slamming him against the wall before twisting the dagger from his hand. The assassin groaned and collapsed, unconscious. Breathing heavily, Eric turned to the boy. "You see now, this is no game. Someone wants you gone." The boy's voice trembled. Eric's expression hardened. "That is the question. But know this. Betrayal always comes from within the palace walls." The words chilled him more than the blade had. The next morning, the assassin had vanished, spirited away by guards before the boy could question him. The official report claimed the man was a lone intruder, but the boy knew better. Someone powerful had orchestrated it, someone close enough to poison his cup and send a killer into his chamber. From that day, trust became a fragile thing. Every smile might hide malice. Every bow might conceal a dagger. Yet even in the shadows of betrayal, he remembered the woman from the dungeons, her defiant gaze challenging him to be different. He realized that survival was not enough. If he wanted to live, he would need to change the very game being played within these walls. For the boy turned prince, the first betrayal was not the end. It was only the beginning.